So words matter. Words change the tone and the frame and behavior. Words can change practice. The adage that you've heard before of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me isn't really true, because words can hurt, but they can also heal. So I want to welcome everyone to the Words Matter series, where we engage in open and authentic discussions about the impact of common terminology used in child-serving systems with those that are directly affected by it. Our goal is to illuminate how the terms we use can influence perception, approach, and practice, as well as explore alternative language or approaches as a means of intentionally shifting how we view and interact with youth, with families, and with each other. So today we're going to explore the use of the term trauma. And before we begin, as usual, would like to have everybody respond to a Menti poll. Think about what comes to mind when you think of trauma. And Bridget is going to put the link to the Menti poll in the chat box. And we'll give a chance for everybody to answer. If you'll just click on Menti, you can see the link in there, menti.com. There's Choppy. There you go. And just what comes to mind when you think of that term? And we'll see a word cloud start to come together. Pain is showing up as the largest one. And with word clouds, the larger the font, the more often someone has used that term in response. The smaller, it means only a few people have used that. So resilience is also popping up, abuse, strong, long-term effect, brain chemistry. Direct is also one that's a little bit bigger, hurt, scared, flight or flight. Triggers. We still have the big ones being pain and abuse, resilience and stress. Strong. Different types. Cyclical. Oh, I love somebody put ACEs. Long-term impact, long-term effect, coping, PTSD. All right. We've got a good idea of what comes to mind. Thanks, Bridget. Okay, so let's talk about how the use of the term trauma impacts youth and families. We've got a great panel today. We have Sharon Alfaro, who's better known as Choppy, and she uses her lived experience as a youth peer in Washington State. We also have Alexis Davis, who is a parent who was raised on the Turtle Mountain Reservation in rural North Dakota, and Heather Tafuro, a parent peer support provider with Families Together New York State. So thank you all for being here and for sharing your experiences and your perspectives with us today. I'm going to go ahead and launch into our questions. Trauma is a term that is used a great deal in mental health and really elsewhere. I've seen them on t-shirts. It results from exposure to an incident or a series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, and or spiritual well-being. It really is a heavy term with heavy meaning, yet it's used easily and sometimes without thought to its real meaning and its impact. Parents or youth may assign different meanings to trauma than this and be impacted by how we use that term, how others use that term, based on their lived experiences in services and in child serving. So, Choppy, I'm going to start with you. From a young adult perspective, what does trauma mean to you?
From a young adult perspective, it can be very confusing. First of all, hello everyone, nice to meet you. I think it can be very confusing because we are becoming who we're meant to be, right? Or we're trying to grow up from where our growth was hindered. Depends, where your trauma happened. If it happened at 5 years old or 15 years old, our growth really does not necessarily stop completely, but it sort of does cease mentally, right? Because it's something traumatic. It happened and you weren't expecting it. It's something huge, and you don't really know how to react to it, especially when you're a child or when you're a youth. You don't have the skills that adults would have, right? And so it can be very confusing because you can be a 23-year-old, with the same challenges that other 23-year-olds have, and you're trying to go to school, and everyone, at least, culturally, everyone around me is already married and has kids, and you're kind of just trying to figure that piece out of yourself, and you have all these choices that a regular 23-year-old would have, right? Do I travel? Do I take this job? Do I apply? Do I take a leap of faith? And then on top of that, you have all of these fears that have accumulated throughout the years. And trauma in itself can be such a big hurdle when going through life on its own. And then you add in a little bit of everything that everyone else is going through, and it can be confusing,
a layer,
right?
additional layer you have to deal with.
Yeah, but I think, and you'll hear me use this word beautiful a lot, right? That's part of the human experience, right? Us being complex. We're not one-dimensional. There's so many things that make us us, and sometimes that piece is our history and our lived experience. It's something that stays with you for life. And as someone with that lived experience, that traumatic lived experience, I'm aware that not only my triggers, but also the why as to who I am. And I'm aware that there are limits. I have extra challenges that not everyone else experiences. And while that might be disheartening at times, it makes living life all the more worth it. So I think it's a strength-based approach that, sometimes you just got to take it in and reword it and change it up. So what are you going to do when you can only think about the negative, right? Life goes on whether you like it or not. It's not up to you. You don't have a choice. Everyone moves on. And when you're a youth or you're a child that experiences that trauma, you don't. And you have to kind of learn to play catch up with everyone else. But I think it's worth it. And I think it just makes it all the more fun, right? You're learning all the time. You never stop learning. You never stop growing. And it's that grind for the enlightenment experience. It never stops. And I think while traumatic can be very sad, very not a happy subject, I want to see it as a blessing in disguise at times, right? I have an upper hand in the fact that I'm always going to be working on myself, and I'm always looking for what else I can do, because the sky is the limit and no one's going to stop me except myself. And I put myself down sometimes.
Perspective and outlook. This is a wonderful way to face that. And I also love that you said, you talked about how it impacts your growth when you're younger. It can kind of stunt that growth, and then you're playing catch up because you do have this layer of things. Heather, from a parent perspective, what does the term mean to you?
Well, before I say that, I just want to applaud you, Chappie, and your resilience and your attitude of, being so strength-based and moving forward and just not letting it affect you and hold you back. That's what I would call miraculous. Not everyone can do that. And I do agree that trauma comes in stages sometimes. you know, so to answer it for me, I think trauma is definitely personalized. Different people would define trauma in different ways. And what is traumatic for one person may just be something that happened in their life to somebody else. And I think it's very important not to try to define someone's trauma for them or try to explain it away. I think, oh, how do I want to say this? Like I've experienced my own trauma. I've watched people go through trauma. I've watched my kids have their own trauma. And so for me, like I had one example I'll give you, like my father was a quadriplegic. I never saw him walk. He was in a wheelchair for the whole memory of my life. He did walk when I was little, but that's not what I recall. And my parents were very resilient. They had a wonderful attitude and they were like, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And my father was always like, well, nothing will stop me except 3 steps, because we couldn't pick up a wheelchair besides 3 steps. He was an activist in regards to getting handicapped accessibility. He fought for getting the curbs, put in. This was back in the 70s, not to mention my age or anything. So they were very positive about it. That didn't leave any room for me to feel any negative attitude. Like everyone saw my parents as these wonderful people, and trust me, they were, but I still had the trauma of not having a healthy dad and not having a normal, I hate that word, set of parents growing up. And I wasn't allowed that freedom, so to speak, to feel that and I didn't even know I felt that until I was older and able to realize that, wow, I went through something traumatic when I was a youth, when I was a kid, when I was a child. So it really does, happen. Trauma is very different for different people. And I applaud you for being so young and being able to have that ability to see things with, I can make it, I can do it. I think that's awesome. I really do. And I'm getting rambled in my thoughts, so I'm going to stop for now and let it move forward before I talk too long.
I love in the chat, some of the things that we're scrolling through. Advocacy is definitely a part of healing. And so that is something that we see that, especially for our young people go through things. And I live in Nashville, and as everyone in the world knows now, we had a school shooting here a couple weeks ago, and our young people have just fought back since then. They have spoken up. They've gone down to the legislature. They have really said, this is impacting us, and you need to do something about it. So that struck me. Advocacy is part of healing from that. So I had to point it out.
And Millie, I just want to comment on that and say that the youth of today are so involved and so like I can just speak for like the people that I work with in my family. Like they're like, this is important. Like, I'm not going to let this go under the rug. Like my daughter will say, no, that's not okay. That's not acceptable. And I'm so impressed with that. Whereas when I was growing up, it was like, you just kind of went with the flow and did what was going on and blah, 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 blah. There's no blah, blahs in this youth. They stand up for what they believe in. And I think that's awesome. And I kind of want to think it's because, some other people in their lives kind of taught them how to do that.
Or supported them to have a voice.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. Thanks, Heather. Alexis, I'm going to turn it to you. What does the term trauma mean to you?
I am, hopefully I stay on track here because I had some thoughts. So, yeah. So, the biggest thing for me, being an Indigenous person living on a reservation, I think, of course, generational trauma, because for me, it's almost like a birthright for me. I already have, as soon as I'm born, I have all these statistics to battle. You know, I already have Indigenous people have the highest rate of suicide, and we have depression, we have anxiety, we have alcohol abuse, drug abuse, poverty, and it's all right on reservations. And like I said, I've lived on one my entire life. So those are things that I was born into. And then you take on the account of, you know, just life experience trauma. So, and those are things, so I was given the birthright to generational trauma because of the things that happened to my ancestors. And I really do see it today, because at first I was like, you know, like, I'm not really sure that it really does impact me the way that people are saying. But then after I really thought about it, I had to learn my own language, and I had to advocate to know traditional knowledge and all of these things. And even when I went forth asking for these things with the knowledge holders in my community, it was like, heck no, we're not talking about that. Why would you even ask that, you know, type of thing. And it was because they were taught that these things were wrong, that they were going to get abused if they shared this knowledge, and they didn't want me to get abused. So they're like, no, we're not sharing that. We're saving you, right? So that's one of the biggest things that I think about when I think of trauma. And then of course, I would like to go back to what Heather had mentioned about it's personal. And I can totally agree with that, because first of all, having generational trauma and dealing with that, and then personal trauma, I have imposter syndrome bad. Like, I'm like, everyone else has been through this. Why is it so hard for me? You know, like we're all dealing with something, right? And especially the way I have been asked to be on a Ken Burns documentary, and I talked about, you know, my mental health journey, and even suicide, and how I got through it, and all this and that. And that's where I got hit big time with the imposter syndrome, because I was like, I met all the other people who were in it, and I was like, maybe it wasn't so bad. I don't know, you know, so, but it really did, you know, after I thought about it, you know, I really did experience these things. These things really did hurt me, and it was really hard for me. And that really did happen, you know, in my life. So, and I think that was one of the biggest reasons that I started sharing my story. It wasn't to say this is worse than yours. It's just like, oh, well, I've been through that too, and I've had those feelings. So it's valid, right? It's validating them. And that's what, you know, my whole shebang is about. So yeah. And I also like to talk about, when you talk about generational trauma, there is such thing as generational healing, you know, and that's also a big one, you know. We really do have to think about moving forward and healing in a generational way. How do we answer to these things, and how do we heal our people? How do I heal myself? You know, some big questions. So yeah.
And you know, one of the things when we talk about being being trauma informed and understanding that it's not just the event or generational. It's not what has happened to you, but it's also how you interpret it and how it impacts you, and how someone could come through something and it not really affect them that much, and another person, it totally debilitates them. So it is very personal, and it is one person. I go back to, I saw a T-shirt the other day, and I think I was talking to Heather about it. It said, "Oh, you thought that was funny? That was just my trauma."
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, at first you're like, oh, but then you start thinking about that and like, wow, okay, it's a heavy term that's often used really lightly.
Yes.
And it does depend on who. And I think even Choppy said this about it being so individual. It just is, it's important, I think, to recognize that it is personal, and it is very individual. Yeah. I'm sorry, was somebody gonna say something?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was just gonna go ahead and jump off on that, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I feel like being mindful about when we use our words and how to use it properly, because when we don't, it can be triggering for some people, right? We're all in different places in our healing. and realizing sometimes, keeping in mind that trauma is what hinders someone's process, right? You could have had this life, for example, for yourself, and you were going on this path and it was so clear and you're right on it. And as a Virgo woman, you can hear the Virgo coming out of me. And then something happens and that was not supposed to happen, right? And instead of simply jumping over that, your life kind of just almost like crumbles,
Mhm.
right?
You slam into it, so jumping over it.
And so I think that's something to keep mindful, right? When talking about trauma, instead of talking about it so lightly, when it comes to other people, realizing that it was not something that they could simply step over. It's something that affected their life, impacted them. And for a lot of people, especially, I'm thinking of like women, we're all women here, which I think is pretty cool. Women, I'm a person of color. I am undocumented, right? I'm DACA. I am a queer person. And I think there are things that, I can't simply do that my counterparts who might have had similar experiences, or similar traumas. And also on top of that, that lived experience, right? We were all raised differently. We all have, as much as that trauma may be similar, we all have different experiences due to other demographics. And so we're all going to react differently, or we're all going to have different opportunities of healing.
Mhm.
And I think that's something to be mindful of, right? When we're talking about trauma-informed care, is we didn't all have the same opportunities for healing.
That's true.
And you bring to mind something that I say a lot, and it's not original. A lot of what I say is never original. I've heard it somewhere from somebody. And that is, we don't compare our stories. We identify our feelings. Because when you're comparing your stories, well, my dog's better than your dog. You know what? We both have a dog and we both love our dog.
Mhm.
So let's identify with that. Because if we try to compare, somebody's going to lose. And you
Mhm.
know what? Nobody's here to lose, because we all had our equal share of pain.
I love that. Somebody type that in the chat so we can keep up with it.
Well, it's being recorded, which is good, because I never
Well, that
remember
is good.
what I say.
That is true. That kind of leads us into a next question. There is a lot of research around trauma and the importance of being trauma informed in our work. Providers are encouraged to be trained on trauma informed practices and approaches, as well as to individualize service delivery, and to take concrete steps to minimize the chance that a person will be re-traumatized by the service. It's fair to say that although there's training available in some practices approach, understanding and using a trauma lens in service provision remains an issue and a goal, because it is, it's shifting the way you think about things. So youth and families may be affected differently when the term is used, but it's not fully addressed in their situation and their experience. So you've already talked a little bit about some of the impacts that you've seen and that you've experienced based on when this term has been used to apply to you or to someone close to you. Talk a little bit about that. What are some of the impacts you've seen, both for you and for the work that you do with youth and families? What are some of the impacts you've seen when people have used it and either followed through with being trauma informed or not?
I think I'd like to kick off on this one because so recently I have two sons now. One is 1 year old and the other is 6 months. So within these years that I've had my beautiful babies, my first son was diagnosed with hydrocephalus. He's had 2 brain surgeries. And then my second one he had RSV, and he was like on the bag, the breathing thing, like it was a whole shebang, right?
Mhm.
And I was dealing with all of this this emotions, right? Like I was angry that my sons had to go through this. I was angry at myself. You know, what could I have done better as a mother to prevent these things? I was blaming myself. I was blaming my body. And then finally I said, you know what? I just need to sort through these emotions. I need to get them out. I need to understand and just, I need someone to talk to. And so the first thing is therapy services where I'm at, little to none. It's very, very hard to get into a therapist office, first of all, and then continuing consistently. So I was like, maybe just one will help me, right? But then as I got to thinking, right, well, I'm going to be telling all this woman this stuff that, all this trauma that I went through and how I'm like so not okay right now. And then I was like, well, okay, I'm either going to get diagnosed with all these things and then possibly lose my children because maybe they think I'm really mentally unstable. And so I was like, wait, maybe not, maybe not. And then, so I was like, you know what, I really am a good mother. And, I just need to sort through these emotions. And I prepared myself to be diagnosed with everything under the list. Right. So, and I was like, it's going to be okay. These titles don't define you. The fact that you are traumatized, right? These are traumatizing times, seeing both my sons almost die before the age of 1 is traumatizing.
Yeah.
So I was just like, okay. So I'm telling my therapist all these things and she was like, okay. So I was like, so what's the diagnosis? She goes, well, you have ADHD, you have PTSD, anxiety, and maybe a little depression, but I really don't think so. And I was like, okay. I just kind of had to take it in. Right. And I feel like those terms can be really daunting. And then of course, saying that I'm traumatized, I dealt with trauma is really, really heavy. And that's why it's like really hard to understand why people are just using it lightly, because when you really are, it's like, I don't want to be labeled as that, and I think you just need to be really careful with things like that and really be caring when people are open about those things, because the next person could be dealing with the same thing, but they're in that stage where I don't want people to know this. I don't want to be known as this, and that's the only thing people see when they look at me. So I think that was my point, my great talking point.
Well, I mean, the whole labeling thing is huge in mental health. We assign diagnoses for a number of reasons, to understand what's going on, to use the research to identify what might be the best way to approach or to treat what's going on, but also to get paid and to be able to continue services. We have this whole system set up where we have to label in order to have that happen. And then, like you said, if someone labels you as being traumatized, do you become, that's just you. Oh, you're the girl with the trauma, as opposed to Alexis.
Right. And I my other point was, so we talk about, I mentioned generational trauma, right? And so I'm doing all this work. I'm trying to help my community heal and, not forget, but heal and move forward to a brighter future. Right. And everyone's just like, well, why should we heal? Why should we move on from this? We get this, and this, we get labeled as this. Why would I do that? It's just like you get stuck right there. And it's kind of like, well, I'm here. And sometimes I feel like you could just sit there and you don't want to move on because it's so mentally hard. I think that's the hardest part of healing, is deciding, okay, I need to get up, I need to get my feet out of the mud, and I need to climb over, this wall, or I need to get on this wave, like I really do think that is the biggest mental block when deciding to take that step. It's just like, I'm already comfortable right here. I already understand how this feels. I don't know how healing is going to go. I don't know if I'm going to if I'm going to reach my goal, if I'm going to do a good job, what if I have a really big setback? What if I
What if
just
it get
fall
worse?
off again?
Yeah.
Yeah, what if it gets worse because now I'm really trying, right? So I think that is the biggest mental hurdle, but that's like we were all saying before, that's the beauty of life. It's all of one big circle, right? And you're continuously healing, you're continuously getting better, you're continuously learning about yourself. And that's the beauty of it, right? I get to learn how I can make myself feel better, right? I get to try all these new things. Maybe it's writing, maybe it's drawing, maybe it's going for a walk, maybe it's as simple as just taking some time, putting some earbuds in and listening to white noise for like 2 minutes, right?
Mhm.
And that could be fun. We're learning how to help ourselves to feel better, and I think I understand that because I'm in that stage. My healing mechanisms and coping mechanisms are not the same as they were, when I was 16 years old, right? They're completely different now because I'm in a completely different environment. I'm a completely different person. So it's all new. And I found beauty in that, where I
Mhm.
can help myself. So I think that is another good shift when you're looking at those things, when you're daunted by the idea of taking that step forward. It is beautiful and it could be fun. And the the thinking, because I was like, okay, I was writing one day, I was trying to journal because journaling helped me before. And I was journaling and I was like, well, this isn't doing it. I got to try something new, like this wasn't doing what it used to. So, I mean, you could consider it a setback, but honestly, it's a win. I understood that this isn't helping me. So now I get to explore something new.
Yeah.
So I think that's also a good topic.
Yeah. What a great attitude too. And if this is no longer working, then that means I get to find something that does work instead of, well, this isn't working, so I'm giving up. Yeah, because you just pointed out that as you get older, the ways that you cope also change the way that you see things. Heather or Choppy, how about the impacts you've seen based on how this term has been used, for you, for your kids, for your family, for those that you work with?
I see it in a lot of pieces because not only am I in the field where I working as a professional, but I'm also someone with that lived experience and in the community. And so it kind of goes back to what Alexis was saying, right? So first with the professional, I've seen an increase of understanding. Not only what trauma-informed care is, but understanding in those one-on-one sessions or those group therapies. Professionals realizing that everyone is at a different place, right, in their journey and in their healing. And as professionals, our job is to meet them where they're at.
Mhm.
That's the part of trauma-informed care. And as professionals, we like to be useful as possible, right? Because a lot of us for sure are definitely not in it for the money. uh, we're in it for a
That's all of
reason. That's all. Yeah. We're in it for a reason really close to our hearts. And so someone had mentioned like self-care and burnout, right? That can be very traumatizing to us too. And we care so much. And I think part of that trauma-informed care is also realizing that not everyone is ready to start that journey, right? I feel like we all have moments where we're like, okay, I'm gonna start, or like I'm ready, or I'm here, I'm back, I'm making that comeback. Chappie's back in the game. Y'all better watch out. And then it's like, actually, I wasn't as ready as I thought I was. I'm gonna take a step back. I'm like, okay, give us more time, right? I have a lot of expectations for myself personally, right? And so when it's not what I want, or I'm not up to standard, right? It's the Virgo woman in me again. Yeah, it's very upsetting, either as a professional or as someone in services. And I have to realize that it takes time. And that kind of leads me back into the community, especially being Latina, right? When I was 15, everything was so different. And I'm only 23. It's been 8 years and I've seen such a change, and it brings tears of joy to my eyes because the reactions that I would get when I was 15, 16, having some sort of psychotic episode because I was putting too much on myself. It was too much. And I think that's part of, the Latino culture, and especially immigrants, right? My parents are undocumented. I'm undocumented. And so every day we're here for a reason, and it's to work on ourselves and to have a better future, not for myself but for our children. Growing up, I wasn't having a better future for myself. I was having a better future for children that are not even here yet. They're not going to be here for decades.
Your legacy.
A legacy, something better para mejorar la raza is what we say. It has a different context, but you can use it for several, right? Bettering our communities. And there was a lot that went into that. And I think a lot of people can understand, in the Latino culture, in the Latino communities, we don't have time for emotions. We don't have time for feelings. We are all work, right? We have no space for that. We always have something to be doing, something we could be doing better. It's your job, school, or your jobs to provide for the family, to provide those opportunities that we lack, especially in marginalized communities. And so kind of like what was mentioned before, right? We all have different opportunities. And so that in itself can be traumatizing. I know that it was for me, and I eventually broke and had that episode, very prolonged episode, and it wasn't fun. And I don't think people realize how much of that generational trauma goes into that understanding, having those feelings, yes, and that trauma throughout your life, but how much more trauma it causes when there's not a disruption to it. And so now in the community, I'm really happy, and like I've literally cried also because I'm a big baby. But I've seen parents understanding that their kids need help. When I got diagnosed with bipolar at 15, I believe, I came out of the therapist office, and I had let my mom know, okay, it's official, I'm bipolar. Or I have bipolar, live with bipolar. To me, it was not a surprise because I know me, right? I know exactly what I was going through, and I was like, yeah, that sounds accurate. My mom, for her, it was like a death sentence. She compared it to autism, which, autism as well, you can have like a regular life just like everyone else. Same with bipolar. But that was not the education that she was provided or given. There was a lot of lack of education in the community. And I got a lot of backlash from my loved ones and my family because of that diagnosis, or because of the symptoms of it. And now I'm so happy to say that, I live, not currently, but I'm going back home because home is home, right? On the east side of Pasco. People are scared to go to the east side. They think it's quote unquote, ghetto. And to be honest, we're all minorities there. But I have seen such flourishing from those minorities, and a big community from that, having each other's backs, and realizing as community, as a Latino community, we can't keep having these same experiences and doing nothing about it to disrupt that generational trauma. Something has to get done. And a lot of has gotten done, and a lot of education has gone into it. A lot of outreach has gone into it. And so I think that's my take on it.
It's a very positive thing. In the chat, someone said you're right. Cultural, ethical expectations can be a source of trauma. Growing up Chinese, I was expected to be a certain way. When I didn't live up to that, I felt like failure, which was traumatic. Yeah, I mean, that definitely can be there.
And realizing too that, you also have basic needs, right?
Mhm.
Sleep is one of them. If you are not sleeping, if you're not eating, that affects you mentally. I think a big wake-up call for us was when in one of the local high schools, a youth very close to my age committed suicide. And it was too much on him. He was doing all of these things, and I think school officials didn't take it seriously because everyone else was alive. So why are you complaining? It was difficult on him, but
Going
you're
back to that
obviously,
individual experience, and that's what defines it as being traumatic or not.
yeah, and not realizing the students were asking for help. This is too much on me. This is too much homework, too many classes, and there was not a good feedback from school officials, but there definitely was from the community. And that's, I think, where we grew from, is from those setbacks or those traumatic experiences that became public. Youth were able to advocate for themselves, and I kind of like Heather mentioned, and now we'll give that, shout out to older generations, because I know us as Gen Z would not be able to advocate for ourselves if older generation hadn't walked so we could run.
Nice.
Nicely said, yeah,
Very nicely said.
yeah.
Not that I like to run, but
Metaphorically.
Metaphorically, yeah. So Heather, do you want to add anything, or do you want me to move to the next question? I'll leave it up to you.
Well, okay, so much went through my head when I was listening
Yeah.
to both of you. That and I was triggered to say a couple of things. And I don't remember exactly, I got a gnat flying in front of me. Chappie, I don't remember what it was you said, and I don't want to misquote what you said, but I wanted to reframe what I heard. And I want to tell you that I saw you as an innocent soul, not as I don't know whether I heard you say you thought of yourself as a baby or a little kid or whatever it was, but I heard an innocent soul. I don't know if you remember what you said, but I was like, no, you're an innocent soul. And Alexis, I would diagnose you as a great mom. Okay. And that's all I'll say for now, because I could keep on going because I talk a lot about a lot of things. So we can move on, Millie.
Okay. Well, I'll start with you about, are there ways that you would recommend from your lived experience, from working with other families, approaches or strategies? What's the best way to exemplify being trauma informed? What can people do to recognize that this is a heavy term, that it's individual, that it's all sometimes it's generational, multi-layered, complex? What would you recommend? What would you put out there as suggestions? I mean, I love the fact that we're saying what's happened to you instead of what's wrong with you.
Yes.
That's more real. That's more, I think, respectful of what people have experienced. What are some things that you would recommend, including using different terms?
Okay. I think it's very important to speak the hard truth sometimes that people don't always want to hear. I, as a supervisor, I went out on a visit with one of my staff because she was working with a mom, because that's what we do. We support parents who have children. At that time, we supported parents that had children with severe emotional difficulties. And my staff member was just at a loss as to how to deal with this parent, because she couldn't, I mean, they were having great social conversation, but she couldn't get her to look at the heart of the matter. And that was really helping her daughter not accept, but helping her daughter's situation. Nobody knows anybody here. So, and it was years ago, so I can say this. The daughter had been sexually abused by her brother. And she was no longer living in the house because she couldn't be where her brother was there. And it was pretty bad. And so I went there to meet with the mom, and the mom said, I don't understand why she can't get over. That's exactly what I did when it happened to me.
I'm telling
And
you.
I was like, what? And it came out that that's exactly what she went through growing up as a child. She was sexually abused by her brother, and she just dealt with it and moved on,
Mhm.
because she never dealt with it. No one ever addressed it. No one ever spoke the fact that she had been abused. And that's a hard truth. That's a hard thing to have to work with.
Mhm.
And we certainly didn't come to any conclusions that night, but at least we found a direction where my staff was able to support her. And we are not clinicians. All we do is help them to talk and send them in the direction of a clinician if that's where they need to go. Sometimes all they need to do is talk to someone and have them there to support them.
Mhm.
You know, everyone is different. Everybody's story is different. And then sometimes I think it's important to share our lived experience and what that is and was and forever will be. You know, I'll speak for me. My dad was diagnosed the year I was born. So I had a lot of stuff going on about that I didn't understand because I was an infant. But what I did understand was that I felt very neglected by my mom. Because hello, the baby cried, but daddy needed assistance. The baby could stay in the cradle, in the crib, but daddy needed the help. And there's no shame there. That's just the way it was. But it left me with a lot of feelings. So to appropriately talk to my mom about this, and I was finally able to do that. I shared, I was really disappointed, hurt, whatever my words were, because I really missed you and I really wanted you to be there for me. And I was floored because I never thought I would hear what I heard. And she said, I missed it too. And I wish I could have been there for you. Well, knock me over with a feather. I never would have expected that. And then she told me all these wonderful things about me that I never knew. I mean, just knock me over and call me Dumbo, you know, but sharing that has helped other people because, you know, if you speak your truth politely and nicely and kindly, you'll be amazed what you get back sometimes.
Yeah, those are two excellent points. Have the hard conversations. It can lead you in the right directions, and to strategically use what you've been through. Share your story so that people feel that there's a connection there, and it's not the imposter syndrome. It's, you know, that you have had some similar experiences, feelings. I want to point out, someone said that Michelle said, for many of us, the cycle of intergenerational trauma includes severe abuse. And that's true. It can continue on and on. Alexis, do you have anything that you would recommend in terms of approaches or ways that people can be more informed about how they use this term?
Yeah, for sure. I think Heather really hit the nail on the head there when it's like sometimes the hard truth is needed. And especially like the person in a comment, most generational trauma is very, very traumatic, and it's usually at the very top of the spectrum. So sometimes when conversations like this come up, you literally have to just be like, that is not normal, that is not okay, and then you have to, and you yourself have to understand why it isn't, and explain to the person that like I said, this isn't normal, and that you shouldn't have to go through this. and that you can get out, right? I think it's very important that you identify and then also give suggestions on how to get out and how to heal. And my whole thing ever since I've been on this whole healing and mental health journey was just sharing my stories, because when I was younger, that's how I connected with people, right? Especially with adults, because there's the authoritative figure type deal, especially I feel like with people of color. When you're an adult, it's very authoritative. And if I say yes, then yes. If I say no, then no. And I am right and you are wrong, right? So when I finally met adults that were like, hey, like, I went through this and this wasn't right. And I went through trauma too, as a person who was around 15 years old dealing with, all those emotions and trauma. It was like, wow, I see you as a person, I see you as a whole. I see why you are you, and I can see how you're doing these things to help yourself. So I connected, right? Like spiritually, like emotionally connected. So that's why I feel like sharing story is so powerful and can help so much when it's done. And when you're because my thing is too, when I share stories, I'm not trying to overpower you. I'm not trying to say, well, I've also been through this. I'm just trying to help you, like, understand that I understand, and then we could help each other, right? We could brainstorm together how to work through this. So definitely yeah, and understanding. And sometimes people could get really angry too. I've had instances where I was in instances like Heather, where I said, you know what, you really hurt me, you really did some things to me. And and that I'm trying to heal through today. And I'm trying to create boundaries, and you're not listening to me. And the other person was still like, nope, I never did that to you. Why would you think that? And these things. So also taking care of myself in that way, creating those boundaries, understanding again that I am not an imposter, and that I really did go through these things and they really did hurt. So those experiences also do happen, and that you could prepare yourself for.
Sure. I want to point out, Valencia said something about, as we share our story, we need to make sure that we're also sharing it in a trauma-informed way, because it can, I don't really like the term trigger, but I'm going to use it. It can trigger something that you've excuse me, been through. So that's an important thing to think. Bridget, you got your hand up.
Oh, yes, just to jump in on Valencia's point. I have started with my friend groups. Before I share something, I ask them, can I share something with you that might be, a lot? Because you also don't know who you're sharing with could be going through at that time as well. So our conversations have gotten so much more caring and vulnerable and open because of that consent back and forth when sharing something that we're going through. Just adding that.
Yeah, it's a great strategy, Bridget, and it's something like before you read something or before they show something on TV, they say, warning, this is something that's graphic and it could be disturbing. So I mean, it's good to have that kind of ahead of time, like somewhat of a warning.
I also think too, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but when you have these conversations, first of all, you get the emotions out, you get the words out, which is big. And then, and then you find your people, right? You found support, and you find interaction and care and love and identity, and feeling yourself feel having friends, and making those connections, and then them helping you. Because even after, like, I share my things, I go to this person like, am I crazy for thinking this? And then I tell them the story, right? And they're like, maybe a little bit, maybe not, but we're in this together, right? So I'm just like, it really, that's also an opportunity that helps when, like, you will share your story. And that's why I'm always like, well, I'll be the first one to share, because that really opens everything up, because I've learned that's what that happens. And I've actually started putting myself on that, on that point there, and making myself an example when I went right as soon as I was going through depression and anxiety, and I was having suicidal thoughts. And I just felt like I was nothing really. Like I was just like, you can't see me. No one knows who I am. I don't even know who I am. I don't even think I'm gonna live past 18, you know? And then that what happened was this other person was like, yeah, I just went to a therapy session the other day. And I was like, you go to therapy? Oh my God, I go to therapy. I'm not the only one. So then after that, after she said that little blip at lunchtime, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I could do for other people. So that's why I'm like, here I am. I'm an open book. Ask me whatever you want, man, because I'll throw it right out there.
Oh, thank you.
And I do want to comment that I did send I should have sent it to the whole group, but I did send a message to Valencia and apologize if I said anything that was upsetting, and that I really appreciated her comment, because I learned that I need to be a little bit maybe more careful and respectful, because I wasn't really thinking, actually, I just was trying to get everything out there. So I appreciated that feedback very much.
And we learn and we grow, and I appreciate you even pointing that out. So it is something that we learn. I mean, I learn something from my colleagues all the time, and just each time I speak with a group like you, I feel like I've gained more knowledge, and hopefully am growing in my skills in that area. I'm looking at time, and we're getting close. I love everything that's happening in the chat, though. There's people are really kind of connecting and sharing information around them. I want to thank the three of you for sharing what you have today, and for being here and being as open about a difficult topic as you have been. So it's very much appreciated, and I hope that it's also impacted people how they think about when they use the term. I would like to return back to what we initially thought about trauma, and consider what you've heard today, what you've learned from those that are here discussing with us, and answer another Menti poll. So this will go in the chat. There'll be a link again. What are some of the things that you're committed to doing now within your role about how this term is used, or to make sure you are employing a trauma-informed link? Use that link that's in the chat box. And Bridget, if you'll share what the responses are within your role. And as people start to respond, we'll see them kind of scroll through. Center before I enter.
Ooh.
That's
I
a good-
like that. Sharing my story when it's relevant. Yes, should always have a purpose. Active listening is important. Yes, don't be ashamed of what you've lived through, because you lived through it.
Yes.
Bible. Yes.
You're wholly and beautifully you, the great and the bad.
Can I just say, I enjoyed this so much. I wish it was longer.
Me too. I could do this all day.
Maybe we'll find another way to do this again. Everyone benefits from trauma-informed care. That's true. Everyone. The trauma and the healing journey are unique to each person. Make sure that I use whatever term the person is comfortable with. Sometimes that's all it takes. That may be all it takes. Listen and share when my story is appropriate. Be sensitive to those around me. No trauma is the same. Yes, thank you. Provider self-care is essential. Yes, it is. That is true. So true. Thank you, Bridget.
That was awesome. I love those.
I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We hope you'll join us next month. Our term next month we're going to be exploring is minority. But I want to throw in a little something extra. If you've been coming to this series, and if you've intentionally changed your use of terminology due to something that you heard here from the young people and the families that have spoken, We'd love to hear from you. The series is going to end in August. Our series wrap up is going to be August 10th, and I would love to be able to compile those experiences and what have people actually done as a result of what they've heard. So if you have been impacted by this, if you have changed something, please reach out to me. You can send me an email at msweeney, for Millie Sweeney, msweeney@fredla.org, and I'll put that in the chat here in just a second. I'd love to hear from you. So in closing, thank you for putting that in there. In closing, we really challenge you to be intentional in using terms so that they are more supportive and respectful of the youth and the family experience and their expertise. Thank you again for being here, and please remember that words matter.
Absolutely.
Great rest of the day.